With every day that passes, I find that my sleep has been less effective to give me, well, rest. When I first came here to create this quarry, I was all alone. There was nobody to meet. The opposite is true now. I often get communications, letters, and meetings with all kinds of old friends from the old world, and they give me all sorts of stories of faraway lands and horrifying monsters and dark places of the world that mankind was never meant to see, and perhaps these are why these strange images and horrifying scenes seem to fill my dreams and shorten my sleep. A lot has transpired since I last wrote upon this journal. I'd asked for some help from an old friend to help me dig the quarry, an assistant quarryman, if you will, and in return I would have to help him with any of his ambitions, and we'd form a sort of coalition. His current ambitions revolved around the river that led into the sea. Many settlers were joining our new world in very faraway places, and I had the feeling a lot of them might need some resources. I had been gathering a great deal of clay, cobblestone, and cobbled deep slate, all great raw materials for building in large mass to save them time. The downside to the new mining methods that many people prefer is that they often don't carry a large surplus of such materials, since their methods revolve around going straight for the valuables such as coal, iron, gold, and diamonds, and anything else they might want, in large open caverns that nature itself has bored open. Nobody had ever implied that having a job like mining into the earth for resources would be easy, but there are so many aspects of the job that you just don't consider to be as difficult they are until you have to deal with them every single day. Chief among them in this case right now is the pure verticality of it all. I had thought to put a staircase on the side of my quarry as I was digging down, using the material that was already there, But that didn't stop it from being exhausting at the end of every single day when I have to climb up it. The least of which, every time my pockets were full, I'd have to climb up it multiple times in the day already. Something had to change. My ally had moved from the temporary hut I put next to my lodge to a cabin out on the sea. At least, that's what his plans were. One day when I came out there to greet him, I found a strange stone bridge was forming in the ocean. I ran over to investigate. His campfire was still burning, and in his hands he had a bucket of lava. Lava definitely seemed to be something he had a specialty in. He added a strange furnace generation device on my quarry, and here he was dumping lava onto the ocean to form a bridge, using the reaction that occurred when lava met water. As someone who mines for a living, lava is absolutely horrifying, and it's considered something you have to stay away from at all costs. He didn't seem quite so afraid of it, though. At least, he seemed to have more of a handle on how to manage it. He told me his intention was to use rails to build an express bridge from here to the plains that met with North and South Town. Those were quite a long way away, but not too bad by boat. This would certainly be faster though, and it gave me an idea. What if I used the same type of rails to make getting in and out of my quarry easier? I still had some rails left over from our mining expedition we'd done when we first met, and some minecarts with chests that could be used to test this out without putting my own self on the line. Most of the minerals I found in the deep serve a similar purpose. Either value for trading with other people and the native villagers and for displaying some sort of status, or for tools, armor, and weapons, wanting to get stronger and stronger. Iron, gold, diamonds, emeralds, copper. But there was one mineral in the deep that always interested me. Redstone. It unlocked a variety of strange machines, the likes of which I'd never really worked with before. But the simplest form of redstone is just used to power devices such as rails to make it go faster. So that's what I was going to use for my mine. That way I wouldn't have to push the minecart up all the way. I begun laying down the tracks down the quarry, and immediately ran into some issues. Chief among them was corners. I dug out this mine staircase to be efficient, using as little blocks wasted as possible. The problem was these rails couldn't turn and go down at the same time. So essentially, if I went down this railway now, I would just crash headfirst into a stone wall, which is not ideal. This is something I would have to work to make work later. The redstone-powered railways that basically made both of our projects work did require a lot of gold. For now, I had a decent stockpile kept in my secret underground cache, but I'd soon be running short. Thankfully, I don't really use gold for much of anything else, so that would really be the only thing I need it for. unlike iron, which is needed just to make everything work in the first place. At this level, smelting minerals in my house seemed a little bit silly, and given that my associate had made some kind of crazy lava generation machine, it seemed only fit to use it for my furnace. Thus, this little area became known as the Great Wall of Furnace, at least between the two of us. A deposit of clay larger than any of my homes combined had been found in the mossy caverns within my quarry. I decided to start converting them to bricks in case I ever fancied becoming some sort of mason. Another feature that had been installed into my quarry by a collaboration between the two of us was the strange waterfall type thing. A narrow hole was drilled all the way as far as it could, practically down to the bedrock layer, and water was funneled through it from up above. Supposedly, you can use it to safely go down and even up, but it did have some strange side effects, particularly with the local fish. As the vibrantly colored fish leapt out of the water to escape to a freedom that they didn't necessarily need in the first place, I swam slowly upward to ensure that, yes, our water feature wasn't connected to any natural water feature that we'd found. I can only imagine the fish were just naturally spawning themselves inside our strange little waterfall. Tragic as it might be, I was starting to acquire a taste for these little tropical fish, even if they weren't particularly substantial. That aside, I decided the time had come to probably test what had been done so far at my associate's railway. Even the highest quality railway, while it's unfinished, may be beautiful and perfect, but ultimately takes you nowhere, which meant that I had to push the minecart all the way back from the middle of the ocean. After receiving a letter from some of the other settlers that had come in a later wave, my associate and I had agreed to go on an expedition into the deep dark, which they had just discovered while digging for resources and attempt to found their own new town. A lot of the other settlers were founding their own new towns. Deep in my heart, I was worried. I hadn't gone on such an adventure, especially not to a place called the Deep Dark before. The only way I could hide my nervousness was just to go about my day as usual, preparing my quarry to be ready for my return, so it wouldn't lose all its efficiency in that time. My weapons weren't very strong, and I had little in the way of armor, but I got ready all the same. The only information we had about these sorts of places was just hearsay, rumors, and folklore. The general undertone of all of them seemed to be that some sort of great sickness had come over the caves in which these cities were placed, after, or perhaps the cause of, their abandonment. They were blind as greed itself, but could hear very well, and disturbing them with too much sound would cause a great beast to awaken. This beast could not be killed. It could only be avoided. I've just met up with the settler adorned in red, and just as that, we are separated. I only narrowly escaped the beast because one of the others had disturbed it. Around me is this strange material. I cannot describe it akin to anything else I've ever met. Meeting the zombies around me seemed only novel. They went down with just a few hits, and looked like simple toys compared to the great beast I had just encountered. However, I had come to notice that every time I struck these simple beasts, these strange, moving, plant-like fixtures, almost as if alive and fleshy and organic, would glow and let off strange pulses. If the rumors about the great beast's blindness are to be believed, then these are what guides it around. They seem to hear very well. Every single minor action I make seems to send a pulse through them, each one to the next one to the next, and far beyond my sight, a web of communication, almost akin to the nervous system that runs through my very body. We began to regroup. I destroyed as many of these strange things as I could. The beast had seriously shaken me. I could see its heart beating within its chest as it walked before me. It had no eyes, yet it had a face, and it was able to let out shrieks, which pierced my very being and shattered my bones, it would seem. I'm sure up close, that would not be a metaphor. At long last, 4 of us arrived in the center of this formation, the ancient city itself. Our 5th member had not yet arrived here, but we assumed they were okay and were just on their way. The place itself had been overrun and simply covered in that strange material I had encountered earlier. The others have informed me that it's called Sculk. It was spread everywhere like a disease, on its outer edges, spread thin, as though it had not concluded growing there, but fully intended to. Every time we disturbed it too much, we found our vision had gone dark and blurry, a side effect of the beast being nearby. If we were sneaky enough, we have been able to outrun the beast, slow but sure. In particular, it cannot hear us when we tread upon carpet, and this place seems to be filled with carpet, although rather decayed, still soft to the foot touch. Perhaps the people who lived here were aware of this remedy. We've only just escaped the great beast. We rarely saw it, but we knew it was aware of our presence the entire time. Eventually, the low groans of its sniffs, growls, and heartbeat vanished from our earshots, and we knew we were safe. The spot we ended up being safe as it happened was at the very center of the city, on top of a great staircase. Some kind of figurehead perhaps lived here. Blue flames emerged from its core, the likes of which I'd never seen before. All that I knew was that flames burned orange. There were perhaps other signs of blue flames in this place, but I'd been too busy to notice. Once my heart had stopped beating, I came to realize the entire reason we'd come here in the first place was to try to find treasure. So far, I hadn't found any. My allies had found some, but it didn't account for much yet, especially from my point of view. There were 5 of us in our company. Myself, my railway building quarryman assistant associate, and the 3 other adventurers from the faraway town they were building. Pool, Abby, and Pyro seemed to be their nicknames. A 6th member had joined our company in the fray of all of our sneaking by the great beast, going by, funnily enough, the name Unknown. This place was starting to become maddening. Everywhere we went, it seemed the monster had emerged from the darkness, crawling through the murky, thick blackness of this cave. It seemed everywhere we went, we couldn't escape it. I was beginning to wonder if this treasure was even worth it in any capacity. Least of which because I hadn't really had any at all so far. Was encountering this level of evil really worth it? All I could do was just ignore these thoughts, because no matter what philosophical point I intended to make in my mind at that point, I was still being chased by a giant blue monster that had a primary goal of shattering my brain, blood, and various other organs, smushing me into a jar, and drinking me for breakfast the next morning. The way time passed here was long and monotonous, and yet still too fast. It seems like it had been days. I was now out of torches, and we were constantly getting reunited and separated again. I was relying on my flint steel lighter to light the ground before me just to provide some form of temporary light, often surrounding myself in a ring when I heard that the beast was nearby. The beast always seemed to be ahead of us, no matter what we did. I had to go against my greater quarry digging instincts when I encountered an ore of diamond, which it seems like not too long ago, was a grand triumphant event when I'd found it. I simply had to stare at its teal-blue luster for a while, and then move on. Even beyond that, I hadn't brought the resources to mine it, and digging it up would only risk alerting the monster to my location. I could hear its groan. It was certainly nearby. This only served to prove to me that this place was simply a large dungeon of torture, even if unintentionally. Soon reunited again, we came to a strange corridor. We had to break it open, and this appeared to be what we'd come to see. A strange area in which redstone devices were being tested, and judging by the amount of sculk covering them all, these were built by the people who lived in this ancient city long ago before they were overtaken by this horrible disease of the earth. While objectively not worth all the pain and torture that it took to get here, to us it seemed like it was. We'd been here so long that it seemed finally overjoyed to not only be in a safe room where we weren't stepping on Sculk every few seconds, but that we were finally getting something out of this expedition. Especially since a lot of these items and resources are that which we probably wouldn't go out of our way to create and craft, some of which we couldn't be able to. They were pistons covered in slimes, those being a creature I'd not yet encountered on this journey. While I was digging up all this redstone, it had brought into my mind a thought, a sentiment even. All these things were built by people, long ago, before the Sculk overtook them all. It grew on top of them like a disease, I can imagine, and on top of their work all the same. They were long gone, but their work still remained here. I wondered who they were, what their names were, what they were like, and how did it come to be they met such a horrible fate. I then realized that much earlier into this voyage I'd encountered a zombie. These were common cave creatures, and I killed it with ease. When I had, the Sculk around me reacted in a very strange way. It almost consumed the being. I then realized that all the people who had lived here had simply been fuel, a catalyst for the stuff that had grown everywhere. This thought was rather morbid. It didn't stop me from harvesting what I could. After all, it'd be a shame to let this all go to waste, and perhaps this machinery could live again through my interest in redstone. My pockets were getting full, and frankly, I was looking for an excuse to simply vacate this place as soon as possible. However, moments after I'd had that strange previous sentiment, my allies had suggested killing the warden. I don't know if the same strange sentiment that washed over me had hit them, or perhaps because they were just thrill seekers, which would line up nicely with the reason they came here in the first place, but for some reason I didn't disagree. In fact, I agreed with them. It sounded absurd coming from my own mouth. However, this would take no simple feat of combat. The beast can be hit thousands of times without falling. We need to be clever, we need to be lucky, and we'd need to be lucky. What happened next was all a blur. The company had all spread out and set strange traps with ladders until one of them had shouted out that it was caught in one. And then we all drew our blades. Only my instincts know why, but after the beast had fallen, I laid down some TNT that I'd found in the ancient ruins and set it alight. I'd never even used TNT before, not on this journey. Perhaps I wanted to rid the last piece of ground that the beast had ever stepped, to definitively remove it from this world forever. Perhaps the Sculk could grow another one, but for now, this city would not be bothered by another beast again. A few weeks have passed since we returned from our voyage in the deep dark. I haven't had a whole lot to say in this journal since then. The whole event really shook me up. I have trouble sleeping now. All I see are visions of that horrible beast. They radiate through my dreams. But thankfully, I got all my strength back from that exhausting voyage. Thanks in part to all the fish I've been eating. Our railway bridge was almost complete. Although the rails didn't quite reach there, it was still efficient to use it to get to the plains that led into Northtown. You could walk on foot the rest of the way if you didn't mind a little bit of a swim. There were some troubles with the mechanism, though. As the confused automatic railway mechanism bounced me back and forth like a ball in sporting play, I had time to inventory everything that had happened on the deep dark journey. I had acquired some great treasures, and I was making an errand on behalf of one of them currently. I'd also acquired some amethyst shards, material I'd never seen before, and a record. It contained a golden innard circle and was simply marked 13. I didn't have a jukebox to play it in my lodge, so what it sounded like would remain a mystery to me. In the weeks prior to our expedition in the deep dark, I'd actually acquired myself a horse. I couldn't pronounce his name, so I didn't bother to. I'd left it in Northtown for safekeeping while I was away. I decided I would adorn it with the diamond armor that I'd found, fit for a horse deep inside the deep dark. It glistened well on its back, and somewhat justified the plunge into the deep dark that I'd taken. At least, he seemed happy. I don't recall if I read it in a book or something, but I heard about this strange method of holding a council in a small hut around a table where everybody sits in boats in small bodies of water, accompanied by a flower pot, each person with their own flower, one flower representing each clan or faction represented at the council. The fact of the matter was, I had been sent another correspondence by some of the people who went on the Deep Dark expedition with me, and they wanted a lot of stone. They were leaning towards cobbled deep slate, based on all the follow-up messages that would come after the initial correspondence. For my particular flower, I'd chosen my favorite variant, the tulip. The red tulip wasn't my particular favorite, but I had the most of them, and they seemed diplomatic somehow. I'd found a bunch of tulips on my initial endeavor to Southtown, when I first met the mayor there. There's a certain slow, tragic sorrow to forced normalcy. Weeks had passed since the Council of Oakland City, and we had made an agreement that at the time seemed fair and logical and beneficial to all parties. They never intended for this result to happen. In fact, they probably suffer for it the most. But the fact was, the native villagers, although not exactly one for conversation with us settlers, weren't exactly foolish either. They'd become aware of what we'd awoken, beneath the stone and beneath the sands, down in the deep dark, and that the Sculk was still very much so present. We couldn't clear it all. The truth was, though, this was somewhat inevitable. It had been coming for a long time, not just because of the villagers, as they have for hundreds of years, and the sight of strange settlers, or in most common cases, pillager attacks ravaging their towns, they'd simply take what was left of them and move on. There were plenty of other places they could build their villages themselves and trade their emeralds and move on like nothing had ever happened. The other problem was, the lands were simply drying up. Not just my quarry, which was starting to reach its bottom, and soon there wouldn't be a large surplus of stone to gather like there had been before. No, rather the other settlers had dug into the earth with great vigor and power, finding the deep slate caverns, finding diamonds, gold, redstone, and this other blue material I hadn't quite coined, and even copper, finding all the monsters with ease, gathering powerful armor, and even traveling into other dimensions. The fact was, the land that we'd chosen was dried up. There was nothing left. This ultimately came at a stark, slow, and tragic realization that soon I would have to move on from the Stonedigger's quarry. It had been so good to me. However, selling stone to settlers who were no longer there simply wasn't logical anymore. This also meant the end of the coalition I'd formed with the Railwayman, as he'd been come to know. Our bridge had just been finished and we were getting ready to build our railway all the way to North and South Town. However, building it now would just be building it for nobody. And yes, on some level, this was horribly sad for me. This quarry had been very good for me. It had been the first place that I'd considered to be a home since I joined this adventure with the settlers and moved on from the old world, as part of the Church of the Birch Crusade, which it seemed like these days everyone had almost forgotten we were in. Sure, we burned some birch trees every now and then. We'd gotten so caught up on other things, it basically wasn't even part of our identity anymore. On the other hand, the part of me that founded this quarry was a part of me that I was ready to move on from. The same fever that had hit the other settlers had hit me, if in a different way. The desire for freedom to move to this new world came with a desire for, no other words, power, resources, adventure, the rush and excitement of going into dangerous places, the feeling of strength from having large buildings all to yourself, commanding villages, commanding quarries, trading. I thought that's what I wanted, but when I had it, in reality it didn't really suit me. I learned a lot from it, but I don't suspect it'll be something I'll come back to. In my final expedition into the quarry, I'd found quite a lot of resources, including diamonds, gold, iron, that blue material I haven't coined yet, more redstone, and another record. I was beginning to take an interest in these records. This one had a green inner ring. I can't wait to listen to it someday. However, I wouldn't listen to it in this quarry. The Sculk had become too much of a liability for all of us, and it was time to move on. And you know, I'm happy about that. All the settlers have agreed we're going to leave tomorrow morning, after we're done with the Depthwalker's railway. This time we'd all be finding a spot together. I would have to leave much behind, but I was carrying with me the lessons from the ancient city, from the dark oak forest, and from the Stonedigger's quarry. I would enter into this new era as a wiser and as a happier man.